Hello, class. Today, what we're going to talk about is the difference between what is considered a good art project and what is considered a non-art project. I know some of you will be shocked and surprised, but hopefully by the end you'll understand the difference. Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about is going to be why in the world do we want to make sure that we're doing a really good art assignment? And the main reason is because when you're engaging the students with a really successful art assignment, you're actually challenging their thinking. You're forcing them into particular higher order thinking skills. So you'll need to know this for the final exam. There'll be a question asking what is HOTS, and higher order thinking skills is going to be your answer. There are basically two major types of thinking that students do engage in when making art, and those are going to be critical analysis and creative problem solving. Basically, these are the two main things that we engage in when we're really making very thoughtful and engaging art. So what we're going to try to do is understand through the rest of this discussion and presentation what makes a particular art assignment do this more than another. The first thing I want to talk about is the use of a coloring book page as a way of making art in the classroom. The textbook would say you should never give a child a coloring book page at all. I don't go so far as to say that, but when we do consider what types of thinking we're engaging in, generally it's not nearly as challenging as a more open-ended art assignment. Basically, when you're doing a coloring book page, most children will try to just color in the lines, or at best, maybe be a little bit creative with their colors. But the problem is, overall, you're teaching a child to simply engage in filling in the blank. What we want to develop instead of just a coloring book page is having children self-generate. The younger and the more frequently that they get to use their own creative processes in drawing and making art from their own mind, what they do is develop their own visual language. And the creative possibilities are so much well beyond the limitations of a coloring book page. This example that I'm giving is not actually a child's drawing, it's from a children's book, but it tells you the idea of how imaginative and just expansive a child's imagination can get if they're allowed to develop that. Now, the time of year that most non-art teachers actually bring art into their classroom is, as you guessed, probably sometime around holidays. The problem is, usually when we bring art into the classroom, it ends up being not a true art assignment, but almost just a time filler. In an example like this one, how much actual engagement do the children have to have? Most of them will do the best they can just to follow the pattern to create the same thing. Occasionally, someone might be a little creative with their placement, but all in all, in the end, what you're going to end up with is just everyone making a time filler project, and when you put them on the wall, they all end up looking the same. Now, the only thing that really stands out about a project like this, especially with younger children, is we all know how much parents and especially grandparents really love having a piece of art using the children's hands as a material. But what we want to do is consider other ways of doing that. Using their hands as a material is not a bad idea. In fact, this example here is a way of using their hands by allowing them to use multiple materials and other construction paper and scissors to create their own imaginative animal. So the contrast of using a pre-planned example that most teachers put up on the wall of something like a turkey, in this example, children are actually engaging in both critical analysis and creative problem solving to come up with an imaginative character of their own. Once again, we have another project that's been introduced in the classroom during the holidays, which is not a very good example of an art project. Using a paper bag and probably a pre-printed and pre-cut Santa Claus, all that children can do really is fill in the blanks and glue it on the bag. Most children will just color Santa the obvious colors, but occasionally a child might be creative and do something different. But in the end, not very much can happen other than just the expected. This next example of a good art project is actually using the paper bag in the most creative way possible. Part of the point of this class is to teach you all how to bring all of the arts into your classroom. And this one is one of those ultimate fulfillments. Children are given a bag, multiple materials are just presented for them to use, and they're told to create a character using their bag. Once the character is created, what they then do is get into groups and come up with a story. And they actually can write a narrative where their puppet characters interact. And once that's done, you then can have them do a puppet presentation where they basically have a play using their puppets. Once they do this, they have gone so far beyond just a simple project that's a time filler, and they've engaged in so many different levels of creativity and engagement among each other as well as their class that the learning that takes place is just on a whole nother level. What I hope you all have realized from these examples is basically the difference between what we consider art that is good for the classroom and not is basically the difference between arts and crafts. When you have a craft project, basically what you're doing is using materials and following directions to where all the students come up with basically the same product. Whereas the art projects are the opposite. What we do in that case is we are given the materials and a general open-ended creativity where the students can actually explore and engage in their own creative process. So what we want to realize now is that the engagement of a real art project ends up being the opposite, where we present materials and we challenge the students to find a creative solution to whatever the project is. And ultimately, they tend to find their own answers, and hopefully they all diverge. So what you end up with is at the end, all of the students doing fairly individualistic projects, and in the end they are actually able to learn from each other as much as they are from their own process. And I also find that when you let them repeat a project over at a later time, they then kind of incorporate their own discoveries with what they've learned from other people, and in the end this is what we really want, is that ultimate learning and personal processing. So I hope by now you all are getting a good idea of the difference between a good project and a non-art project. I'm not saying that crafts are bad. In fact, I love to produce crafts, and a lot of times what I do is make a familiar art or craft project of something I've seen either on Pinterest or Google or even at the store, and then by doing that I figure out how to use the materials and then ultimately become more creative by using that in my own processes. So crafts aren't bad in and of themselves, but we definitely want to try to make as good an art project as possible. So to go along with this, what you're going to do is do some research online. I want you to use your own discernment of what I've told you and do a research for either integrated art lesson or even, art lesson for the classroom, something like that. And once you find one, I want you to try to find the best one possible. Don't just find the first one on Google. I've seen all of the first page of Google many times. What I want you to do is try to find one that's really good, really creative, and then write a short essay telling what makes that a really good art project. This will help me know that you've at least considered it as well as understood what the difference between good art and non-art is.